You've been told a new drug takes 12 years and $2.6 billion. That's the number the whole pharmaceutical industry runs on. But a generative AI in China designed a brand new drug molecule from scratch in about 3 days. And that molecule has already been tested in real patients fighting a lung disease that usually kills them within 4 years. The headlines call it 48 hours. The truth is stranger than the headline. And by the end of this video, you'll understand what that computer did, and the catch nobody selling you the miracle wants to say out loud. Let me start with that $2.6 billion number, because it's the whole reason this story matters. It comes from the Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development, a research group in Boston that pulled real data from 10 pharmaceutical companies covering 106 drugs, and in 2016, they landed on a figure that shook the industry. To take a single new medicine from the first idea all the way to a pharmacy shelf costs about $2.6 billion and takes more than a decade. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire budget of some blockbuster movie franchises, spent on one pill that might not even work. And most of them don't work. Of every 5,000 to 10,000 compounds that enter the pipeline, roughly 1 makes it to approval. 1. It gets worse, because that failure rate has been getting steadily more brutal for decades, and there's actually a name for it. Researchers call it Eroom's Law. That's Moore's Law spelled backwards, and the joke is deadly serious. Moore's Law is the famous idea that the number of transistors on a computer chip roughly doubles every 2 years. Eroom's Law, named by a scientist named Jack Scannell in a landmark 2012 paper, describes the exact opposite happening in medicine. The inflation-adjusted cost of inventing a new drug has roughly doubled every 9 years since the 1950s. We pour in more money, more computing, more brilliant scientists, and we get fewer drugs out the other end. Everything else in technology gets cheaper and faster. Drug discovery got more expensive and slower, year after year, for over half a century. Part of it is a steeper bar for every new drug, and part of it is regulators growing more cautious over time. So where does all that money and time actually disappear to? The instinct is to assume the expensive part is manufacturing, or the factories, or the marketing. It isn't. The most punishing, most expensive stretch of the whole process happens at the very beginning, before a single human ever swallows anything. It's the discovery phase. First, you have to find the right biological target, the specific protein or enzyme inside the body that's actually driving the disease. Then you have to invent a molecule that grabs onto that target and shuts it down, without poisoning everything else in the process. And the odds at that first step are savage. Alex Javaronkov, the man behind this story, puts the odds of hitting the right target at 1 to 5%. Think about that. You can burn years and hundreds of millions of dollars chasing a target that turns out to be a complete dead end, and only find out after the money's already gone. And then there's the molecule problem, which is almost harder to wrap your head around. The number of possible drug-like molecules you could theoretically build is astronomically large, more than every chemist alive could test in 1,000 lifetimes. Finding the one that works has always been part science, part educated guessing, and part sheer luck. That's the wall the industry has been slamming into. More money going in, fewer drugs coming out, and a first step that's essentially a very expensive coin flip. So the question everyone in biotech was quietly asking was simple. What if you could hand that impossible opening move, the target and the molecule, over to a computer? And I love this detail. The man who ended up doing exactly that had actually written a public article a few years earlier, asking when artificial intelligence would finally beat Eroom's Law. He wasn't just chasing a headline. He'd been circling this specific problem for years. That brings us to a company called Insilico Medicine. It was founded back in 2014 by 2 longtime research scientists, Alex Javaronkov and Alex Aliper. It's an unusual company because it was originally founded in the United States, but today it's listed in Hong Kong, and it runs the muscle of its operation out of China. And Insilico built something they call Pharma.AI, an artificial intelligence system with 3 separate engines, each one aimed at a different piece of that expensive discovery wall. One engine hunts for the target, a second engine invents the molecules, and a third one tries to predict how a clinical trial will actually play out before the company spends a fortune running it. The first engine is called PandaOmics, and its job is to answer that brutal opening question. Out of the thousands of proteins and pathways in the human body, which one do you go after? Javaronkov's own background is in the biology of aging, so his team fed the AI enormous piles of biological data. Gene expression, protein expression, information about how bodies change over time in both health and disease. And instead of a room full of scientists arguing over a hunch, the AI read all of it and came back with a short list. For their lung fibrosis program, PandaOmics surfaced 20 possible targets, then flagged one novel intracellular target as the most promising of all of them. A target that, as far as the public record shows, no drug had ever been designed around before. That step alone would normally be a multi-year research gamble with terrible odds. Then comes the engine that generated all the headlines. It's called Chemistry 42. And this is the part people are pointing at when they say the AI built a drug in 48 hours. Once PandaOmics handed over the target, Chemistry 42 took over the job that human chemists have done by hand for a century, inventing a molecule that fits the target like a key fits a lock. But it doesn't work the way a human chemist does. Javaronkov describes it as a generative model zoo. It's an ensemble of around 500 different AI models running together. Transformers, generative adversarial networks, genetic algorithms, all of them imagining brand new molecules out of nothing. And here's the clever part. Every single molecule the system dreams up gets instantly scored by the other models, rewarded or punished based on how well it grips the target, whether it's chemically stable, and whether a human body could actually absorb it. The strongest molecules survive and get bred into the next generation, while the weak ones get thrown out on the spot. Thousands upon thousands of them, in a relentless loop, faster than any laboratory on Earth could ever synthesize and test them. Rather than picking through a catalog of known drugs, the AI invents brand new compounds from the ground up, structures that would look completely alien to a trained chemist, molecules nobody would ever think to draw on a whiteboard. Javaronkov says they let that process run for about 72 hours of heavy computing, just 3 days. That is the real number sitting behind the 48-hour headline. In roughly the time you'd spend on a long weekend, the AI generated and scored an enormous virtual library of candidate molecules. Out of that flood, the team picked a small handful worth actually building in a real lab. They synthesized fewer than 80 real compounds. And the winner, the one that showed the strongest grip on the target, with a clean safety profile in early animal tests, was molecule number 55. They named it ISM-001. In early lab tests, it didn't just grip the target cleanly. It improved lung function and reduced scarring in mice, exactly the signal the team wanted. After some fine-tuning to improve how the body handled it, it got a longer technical name, INS-018055. Today, the world knows it as Rentosertib. There's a third engine too, and it's easy to overlook, but it matters. It's called InClinico, and its whole job is to predict whether a clinical trial will actually succeed before the company sinks tens of millions of dollars into running it. Remember, only about 16% of drugs that reach human testing ever make it to market. The rest fail, often late, after huge sums have already been spent. So an AI that can look at a candidate and forecast its odds in advance gives a company a way to kill the likely losers early and pour its resources only into the drugs with a real shot at working. Target discovery, molecule design, and trial prediction. 3 engines aimed at the 3 places where drug programs bleed the most time and money. Now, if you're finding this as wild as I am, take a second to subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of story I dig into every week. The real machinery behind the headlines about China's technology. All right, back to the molecule, because designing it was only the beginning. A brilliant molecule on a screen means absolutely nothing until it survives contact with a living body. And this is where the timeline gets genuinely hard to believe. From the moment PandaOmics locked onto that target, to the moment the team had a finished preclinical drug candidate ready for serious testing, took about 18 months. For comparison, that same stretch of work traditionally runs somewhere around 4.5 years, and often far longer, with no guarantee of a result. Independent AI researchers who examined the work called it a genuine first, a case of AI handling the entire chain, from finding the target, to predicting a molecule's properties, to generating the structure itself. Soup to nuts, as one chemist at the University of Michigan described it. The whole front end of drug discovery, the part that used to eat years and fortunes, compressed into 1.5 years. From there, it moved into humans, faster than almost anyone expected. Insilico ran the first human microdose trial in late 2021 in Australia, giving the drug to 8 healthy volunteers just to confirm it was safe. And it passed. From there, the drug advanced into full phase 1 trials in New Zealand and China, and then into phase 2 trials with actual patients in both China and the United States. And remember what this drug is fighting. Idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis is a disease where the lungs slowly harden into scar tissue until a person simply can't breathe anymore. It affects around 5 million people worldwide, and median survival after diagnosis is just 3 to 4 years. There is no cure, and the handful of existing treatments only slow the scarring down. None of them stop it. For those patients, the speed of all this is deeply personal, because it can decide whether a treatment shows up early enough to actually buy them more time. For years, the entire field had been waiting for one specific thing. As Javaronkov himself put it, everyone in the industry was waiting to see the first AI drug cross the finish line. Plenty of companies had used AI to help nudge a molecule along, or to speed up one small piece of the puzzle. But nobody had taken a drug where the AI both found the target and designed the compound, and carried it all the way into serious human trials with real results to show for it. There was a lot of hype in the field, and a lot of quiet skepticism that any of it would actually pan out in a living patient. Then came the moment that turned this from a bold claim into hard scientific fact. In 2025, the results were published in Nature Medicine, one of the most respected peer-reviewed medical journals in the world. And that publication marked a real milestone. Rentosertib became the first drug in history where both the target was discovered by AI and the molecule was designed by AI to complete a phase 2A clinical trial and publish its results. This wasn't a computer simulation or a hopeful press release. This was a real drug that a machine had essentially invented, showing measurable effects in living patients, then written up and checked by independent scientists. The target it hits, by the way, is an enzyme called TNIK. And Insilico says the entire program cost roughly 1/10 of what a conventional drug discovery effort would have burned through. And the results weren't just about safety. The phase 2 trial reported signs that the drug was actually improving patients' lung function, the exact thing you'd want to see in a disease that steadily strips people of their ability to breathe. That's the piece that made scientists sit up. Getting a molecule to be safe is hard enough on its own, but getting an AI-invented compound to walk into a room full of sick people and actually start doing the job it was designed for is a far higher bar. And this trial suggested it was clearing it. It's worth saying that Insilico isn't the only company chasing this. There's a real global race underway, with Western firms like Recursion and Exscientia running their own AI-driven pipelines, and plenty of compounds from various companies now moving through clinical trials. But Insilico's lung drug is widely recognized as the one that got furthest first, the clearest proof so far that a target found by AI and a molecule designed by AI can survive all the way into meaningful human results. In a field that has produced far more promises than finished drugs, it was one of the first to put real evidence on the table. So that's the miracle. A computer read human biology, picked a target nobody had ever drugged, imagined a molecule over a long weekend, and that molecule is now being tested in dying patients and actually working. Which brings us to the catch, because there's always a catch, and this one really matters. Here's the honest version. That viral comparison, 48 hours versus $2.6 billion and 12 years, is quietly comparing two completely different things. The 2.6 billion and the decade cover the entire journey, from the first idea, through years of expensive human trials, all the way to final approval. The AI's stunning speed only applies to the very front of that journey, the discovery step. The 3-day compute run designed the molecule. It did not run the clinical trials. It did not manufacture the drug at scale, and it did not get it approved. As of right now, in 2026, not a single AI-designed drug has actually been approved for sale by the United States Food and Drug Administration. Rentosertib still has to survive the same long, expensive, brutal gauntlet of late-stage human trials that every drug faces, and plenty of promising drugs die in exactly that gauntlet at the very end. It's also worth poking at that famous $2.6 billion figure, because even that number is softer than it first appears. When you read the fine print of the Tufts study, only about 1.4 billion of it is actual money spent. The other 1.2 billion is what's called opportunity cost, the theoretical profit that investors could have earned if they'd put the money somewhere else instead. And critics have pointed out for years that the raw data behind the whole estimate was handed over by the drug companies themselves and never made public. So, the number the industry loves to quote when defending sky-high drug prices was never quite as solid as it looked in the press releases. But none of that makes this breakthrough less important. If anything, it makes it more important. Think back to where the real bottleneck actually was. The killer, the thing that made drugs cost billions and fail more than 99% of the time, was that opening gamble. Picking the right target and inventing the right molecule. That was the coin flip at the front of the entire process, and getting it wrong meant torching years and fortunes with nothing to show. AI didn't shrink the whole pipeline. It walked up to the single most expensive, lowest odds step in the entire enterprise, the one nobody could simply buy their way out of, and it started winning that gamble far more often and far faster than any team. Fixing that one brutal step, the place where most of the money and years used to disappear, is enough to shake the economics of the entire business. And that's the exact part the machine ate. And there's a downstream consequence here that lands squarely on ordinary people. For decades, drug companies justified eye-watering prices by pointing to that gigantic development figure and saying, look, this is what it costs us to invent anything at all. But if AI can slash the cost and the failure rate of the hardest part of that process, then a huge chunk of that justification starts to wobble. Cheaper discovery could eventually mean cheaper drugs, and drugs for diseases that were previously ignored because the math never worked. Rare conditions, neglected illnesses, the ones with too few patients to ever earn back a billion-dollar bet. Those are exactly the kinds of problems an AI running for a long weekend could start to make economic sense of. That's the real prize here. Which raises the obvious question, why is this happening in China and not in Boston or Basel? Part of the answer is the AI itself, but a much bigger part is the ecosystem built around it. Jawaronkov describes a place called Zhangjiang, an innovation district in Shanghai, where a molecule the AI invents can go through chemical synthesis, enzyme tests, cell tests, and animal experiments all in one single location, without the compound ever having to leave the site. In the West, those steps are often scattered across different companies in different cities, and every single handoff adds weeks of delay and stacks on more cost. In China, it's all under one roof, running fast and running cheap. Now add in lower research costs across the board, and a regulatory system that's been deliberately streamlined to move quickly, and you get an assembly line for experimental medicine unlike anything anywhere else in the world. And Rentosertib is very much not a one-off fluke. Insilico has now generated 31 preclinical drug candidates since 2021, and 13 of its programs have already cleared the regulatory step that lets them advance toward human trials. Its single fastest program ever reached a drug candidate in just 9 months, working with a Chinese partner on a cancer drug. The company has signed major research deals with Western giants like Eli Lilly and Takeda, and it recently struck a partnership with Taiwan's Bora Pharmaceuticals that's potentially worth more than $2.5 billion. And there's a fascinating wrinkle. The company actually does its most advanced AI research abroad, in Montreal and in Abu Dhabi, but it runs the physical drug validation and scale-up in China. The brains are global, the factory floor is Chinese, and that specific combination is exactly what should be making the rest of the industry nervous. For years, the Western response to China's rise in biotech has focused heavily on things like manufacturing and supply chains, on laws written to keep certain Chinese companies out of the American drug system. But those rules were aimed squarely at the factory. The shift that's actually happening here is in the science itself, at the discovery end, the creative front of the pipeline that everyone assumed only deep-pocketed Western labs could ever dominate. When the most creative and most expensive step in inventing a medicine can be run by an AI on a server farm in about 3 days, the old advantages start to look a whole lot less permanent than they used to. This was never really a story about one lung drug. It's a story about who gets to invent the future of medicine, and how fast. A machine just performed the hardest, most expensive, lowest odds task in all of pharmaceutical research, and it did it over a long weekend. And that forces a much bigger, much more uncomfortable question to the surface. If artificial intelligence can now invent the medicine itself, how long until it replaces the person in the white coat who's supposed to prescribe it? Because that's already starting to happen too, in Chinese hospitals right now, with AI systems that diagnose and treat patients faster, and in some cases more accurately than human physicians. That story, the one about AI doctors making human doctors obsolete, is on screen right now. Go and watch it next.